I better start over again. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Metropolitan Mobility Network. My name is Adam Levine, and I'm the recently named Executive Director here at NIMTEC. So recent, in fact, that this is the first Metropolitan Mobility Network meeting I have the pleasure of attending. I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm explaining things everyone else may already know, but it's a little bit new to me, and maybe it's a little bit new to some other folks too. Things like the fact that the Metropolitan Mobility Network advises and informs NIMTEC and the member organizations of the Metropolitan Area Planning, or MAP, also MAP, Forum. The MAP Forum is a consortium of 10 metropolitan planning organizations and councils of government in the multi-state metropolitan region surrounding New York City. The MAP Forum was started around 15 years ago from a suggestion our federal partners offered that we should collaborate across our usual geographic or political boundaries on issues that go beyond those borders. While mobility is certainly one of those issues that crosses borders, and the Metropolitan Mobility Network advises on areas of transportation systems management and operations, also known as TISMO, to help keep us on the cutting edge of innovative solutions to help us all better plan for future transportation improvements. Our meeting today features a presentation up first on one of those innovative solutions, which is mileage-based user fees. We are pleased and honored to have with us today Virginia Smith-Reeder, Director of the Innovation Program at the Eastern Transportation Coalition. It's been a few years since the I-95 Coalition changed its name to the Eastern Transportation Coalition, but it's still worth noting that the ETC is a partnership of 17 states and the District of Columbia that includes over 200 member agencies and organizations, of which NIMTEC is one. Virginia has worked in the field of transportation for over 20 years, and as Director of the Innovation Program, she leads multi-state and regional initiatives and information sharing in the topics of mileage-based user fees, electric vehicles, and tolling. Prior to joining the coalition staff, Virginia was the Director of Performance Management Coordination in Massachusetts DOT's Office of Performance Management and Innovation. Just some logistics. After the conclusion of Virginia's presentation, we'll take some questions from you, our attendees. If we do have guests in the room when we get to that point, we have a microphone for them to ask their questions. For those of you participating via the webinar, please write your questions into the chat pod, and NIMTEC staff will read them to our speaker. And now I will eagerly turn the microphone over to Virginia. Virginia.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and you know, I love your introduction. As your organization exists to promote those transportation issues that cross jurisdictional boundaries, and that's what we are all about at the Eastern Transportation Coalition as well. So I'm going to share my screen here. Sorry, I just did this, so I should be quick. Okay. Okay, can I get a thumbs up or something that everything looks good? Okay, excellent. All right. So thank you all. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited about this opportunity, and I think this is a really fascinating topic that is it really is important and timely and exciting, and there's a lot going on. So I'm really excited to share this with you today. So what I'm going to do is really just take a big step back, talk about what is the problem we're trying to solve here. Why are we trying to take something that actually is a really simple system and has worked well for 100 years and shake it up and find a new way. And then what are some of the ways that we are exploring to deal with that problem? And then from there, mileage-based user fee is one of those, and I'm going to sort of dig into the research that we've done as the Eastern Transportation Coalition, give you some key findings, and then talk about kind of color that in with some specific pilot findings. And I sort of focused on some specific to your region, mostly New Jersey is where we have the most recent in-depth data. So I'll get into some specifics there to just kind of color it in. So what is issue? I don't think anyone on this meeting needs to be convinced that we need our roads, but we need our roads, and we need them to be safe, and we need them to work well. We need them to get to work, to get to school, and we need things, you know, to be able to get things delivered to our homes and our businesses. And so, as I'm sure all of you in this meeting know, we have spent for the past 100 years, we've paid for these roads, these bridges, this infrastructure by fuel tax that's collected both at for federal and state funding sources. And it's worked pretty well. It's really easy to administer. It's really efficient and cost effective. But as this graph shows, the cost, the amount that we're collecting per miles driven is decreasing pretty significantly over time. And so that's a problem. We have people driving the same or more miles on our roads, and we're collecting less per mile driven. And why is that? Well, it's because our transportation fleet is shifting. So this is a good graph to show kind of the impact of this wonderful technology that we have that's hitting our roads and increased efficiency, and everything from, you know, the far extreme of electric vehicles, which buy no gas to move them around, but even our hybrids and our high efficiency vehicles, it's great. We're buying less gas. There's a lot of good things about that. We want that to happen, but it comes with the cost in reduced revenue to our transportation fund. And it's not just tiny little Nissan Leafs anymore. Electric vehicles are here, and they're coming in all different shapes and sizes, and we need to think about that. And the other really important piece here is that there's been some research done that it's not just an electric vehicle problem. Actually, this is work that was done for the state of Virginia, and they hired KPMG to do this analysis to look at, okay, where are we going to be in 2040 with our fuel tax revenue projections? And what this graph is showing is that, yeah, electric vehicles are making a little dent, but really the big issue here, the big impact to the loss in revenue are those higher fuel efficient vehicles. And those are everything from hybrids, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, but also even just our increased efficiency in the vehicles that we're buying and the ICE vehicles. And here's a great example of kind of the reality on the road. This is an example we pulled from Pennsylvania data, but basically you take these two Toyota Camrys, they're the exact same size, the exact same car, 10 years apart, and one of them, the 2019 car, is paying less than half of the annual state fuel tax than the one the 2009 vehicle. And this is based on an average drive, 12,000 years driven, so same number of miles, but this is the impact. So this just shows you, you know, even cars, they're gonna have the same wear and tear on the road, drive the same number of miles, but the owner of the 2009 Camry is paying more than double. And so there's a fairness problem here as well, and we'll get into some of that later. So that's the problem. What are we going to do about that? And so there's different solutions, and of course there are more options beyond this. There's a lot of ways to gather tax. You can put sales tax and do different options, but generally, you know, tax policy is best when it's tied to the user. So here are sort of three options that states are starting to look at. An annual flat fee sort of associated with a registration that can kind of try to recoup some of that lost fuel tax revenue. Kilowatt hour fees, so that's actually paying for adding a fee or a tax on top of the electricity that you would be buying to fuel your electric vehicle, and that would be, you know, applicable for an electric vehicle. Or then mileage-based user fee. So the annual fees, as you can see from this map, this is becoming a really common way to try to collect back from electric vehicles some of that lost revenue because they're not buying fuel at the pump. And this is spreading. You know, some of these lighter teal colors are going to be turning darker pretty soon. And it's actually, I think it's a good sort of interim solution. It certainly is easy to do. It can, you know, be associated with other fees you have to pay when you register your vehicle. Every state has that set up. But it's not there's some issues with it because it doesn't address that high efficiency. There's one exception to that, which is in Virginia, and I will get into that as well because their program does take into account those high efficiency vehicles. But for the most part, these are fees on electric vehicles, so it's only getting that population of vehicles. And it also doesn't, it's not connected to your actual use. So if you're someone who lives in an urban area and you have an EV and you drive it, 5,000 miles a year, you're going to pay the same in that registration fee as if you're someone who drives 40,000 miles a year. And so it sort of breaks that link between usage and payment. But it's a good stopgap measure in the meantime. Another option that some states are looking at is this kilowatt hour tax. We're basically attempting to put a fee onto the electricity purchased to fuel electric vehicles. And these are very new for the most part. The only one that actually is in place so far is in Pennsylvania. And it's really cumbersome. There are a lot of problems with it. And one of the main problems in general with this concept and this idea is that what we've seen in research is that 85% or more of people are going to charge the vehicles in their home, at least now. Certainly most EV owners at the moment, tend to be higher income, tend to live in single family situations or at places where they have access to charging at home. And it's basically impossible to imagine setting up a system where every home charging mechanism can be metered. And so these are really more for the public charging. And then that sets up an issue where people that maybe don't have that access at charging at home are more likely to have to charge in a public station, and they would be paying the fee. So there are some issues, and I will say, just give an example that Vermont last year, 2 years ago, really tried to figure this out, and their idea was that Vermont is a state that is economy is greatly supported by out-of-state drivers coming in as tourists, whether it's to their ski resorts or to see the fall foliage. And so electric vehicles who are not, vehicles that are not buying gas at the pump are not paying to support their infrastructure at all. And so they thought, well, maybe we can impose one of these fees on our public charging to try to recoup some of what's lost when drivers with electric vehicles are coming in. So they did an analysis, and basically what they found was that it's just not worth it. At the end of the administration and all the infrastructure needed to set up a program like this, maybe they'd come out with $5,000 at the end of it all. So at least at this point, this is kind of where we are. So that's a kind of quick overview of where we are. So which brings us to the main topic here, the main thing we want to discuss today, which are these mileage-based usage fees in this concept. So at the very core, what's an MBUF? Mileage-based user fee is moving from a system where we pay a fee based on how much gas we buy. So that's the gas tax we pay at the pump, federal and state. And we shifted over to paying a fee for the number of miles you drive. It doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you have, what kind of fuel you put in your vehicle. It's based purely on the number of miles that you drive. So in 2016, so the Eastern Transportation Coalition, as was mentioned at the top of the meeting, is an organization of 17 states and the District of Columbia on the Eastern Seaboard. And in 2016, this map doesn't actually show this, but there was some work going on the West Coast. Some of the West Coast kind of Western states were looking at this MBUF idea, but no one on the East Coast was. And so the coalition decided to get involved in this conversation because it's kind of a perfect thing for us to be engaged in, because we like to kind of work on these sticky issues that cross state borders and really benefit from some regional collaboration and thinking and learning and that sort of thing. So yeah, so this is the map of the actual coalition states. you know, as everyone here from this region knows, we're kind of an economic engine in this part of the country. We have a lot of miles traveled. We have a lot of out-of-state mileage. We have a lot of teeny tiny states, a lot of people crossing state borders all the time, and major economic freight activity. And so we felt like this is a really important topic for us to get involved in. We wanted to help further this conversation in this side of the country, in our context, with our conditions on the ground, and you know, look at these issues like out-of-state mileage, trucking, motor carriers, and kind of how would this work for us on the East Coast. So so that was where we got involved. We've funded this work through STFA grants, which stands for the Surface Transportation System Funding Alternatives. There have been 6 phases of these grants, and we are 6 for 6. So we've won grants along the way, and we've done this in partnership with a number of states, and I'll show you who those are in a minute. But basically, we've started with small pilots, sort of key stakeholder pilots, and over time we've added on more states, and we've moved into general public pilots, which is what we just recently wrapped up in our phase 4 work, specifically big general public pilot in New Jersey, and again I'll talk about that a little bit later. And so we are just now kicking off phase 5 of this work, which has 8 states involved. And we've also already been awarded phase 6, which will get started within the next year. And then after this, there is another round of grants that have come out through the IIJA, these are called the CIRC grants, which stands for Strategic Innovation for Revenue Collection. And I'll just mention right here that the one difference, there's a few differences in this new round of grants, but one of them is that MPOs and COGS and other regional entities are eligible to apply. So that is something that may be relevant to this audience. So anyway, here we are today in 2023. This is what things look like now on the East Coast. So it's exciting to see this progress. You can see our little map here shows all the states we have been working in. And then these are the states that have been actual pilot states, but our work has also, we have engaged other states as well in some of our mileage-based, some of our motor carrier work, and we're sort of working in partnership with a few other states. But anyway, there's a lot going on. States are really paying attention and looking at this. And so again, this is now the whole country. And I think what's noteworthy here is these blue squares show the 3 states that have live programs. So we've got one on the East Coast, that's Virginia, and I will speak a bit more about that. And then we have Oregon and Utah, all have live programs. And then a number of states have run pilots. And then there's a lot of other studies, research, and stuff going on. So again, it's a big conversation. So the 3 states that I mentioned, these are all voluntary programs. This next slide gives a little more detail about them. So Oregon is the oldest program that they've been up and running since 2015. They are, I think one thing that's unique about them is that they do not have a fee cap. And I want to just point that out because that seems to be a critical driver for people to join. And so that what that means is that basically compared to Utah and Virginia, if you decide to be part of their Origo program, their MBUF program, which again is a voluntary program, you do get a discount on your registration, but you pay for the miles that you drive up until you continue to pay. If you drive more miles, you continue to pay more miles. In contrast, Utah and Virginia, you replace a fee that you would otherwise have to pay because of the type of vehicle that you drive. But let's say that fee is $100. If you hit $100 in MBUF fee for that year, then you're frozen. You don't pay more than that. So there's really it's kind of a no-brainer. You have an opportunity to save a little bit of money, and it's not going to cost you any more money. So Oregon is the one that doesn't have that. And I do think that, I mean, there are different factors in the sizes of these programs, but it is noteworthy that Oregon's been around the longest, and they're just sort of hovering at 800 people in their, or 800 vehicles in their program, whereas Utah and Virginia are much larger programs now, and they do have that kind of built-in incentive. The thing that's different about Virginia, which again is the newest program, they just launched July 1st of 2022. And their goal, their target for enrollment was 2,000 vehicles in the first year. And they hit that 12,000 number by the fall. It was way more popular than they expected it to be. And the thing that's different about Virginia is that it's not only sort of electric vehicle hybrid fees. They have a highway use tax that they imposed about a year or two before they started the mileage-based user fee. And so any car that is registered in the state of Virginia that gets more than 25 miles per gallon has to pay a highway use fee. And that's, again, to kind of offset that loss in fuel tax that those vehicles are not paying because they are not buying as much fuel. And the amount you pay in that highway use fee is proportional to how efficient your vehicle is. So if your car gets 26 miles per gallon, it's a pretty small amount. If your car gets 55 miles per gallon, it's a larger amount. There's complicated math behind it and how it works. So if you're in that, if you'd like to enroll in this program, instead of having to pay that highway use fee, you have an opportunity again to save some money, because if you are someone who doesn't drive an average amount per year, you would pay less because you're only paying for the miles that you drive. So that's kind of an overview of what's going on around the country, some of the actual programs that are out there. And so now I'm just going to kind of step through some of the things that we as a coalition have learned through all the work that we've done. So one of the big things that we've taken away from all this many years of work in many states now is that it's really important to think about this from kind of all perspectives and all users. And it's different. It's different when you're the electric vehicle owner who is really excited about their new car and they're not going to have to buy gas. But a lot of them don't realize that they are not paying for the roads if they're not paying a fuel tax. And so for them, you know, it's some of it is just an education campaign. And actually what we're finding is that there's this sort of myth out there that EV owners are going to hate this idea of MBUF. But the fact is that they're still not going to have to buy gas. They're just going to have to sort of replace that money that they aren't spending on the fuel tax, which is a very, very small percentage of the overall cost of paying for gas every year for an ICE car owner. So for them, it's really this education. And we're finding that as we do outreach and talk to people and EV owners, they say, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I like my cool new car. I like that I don't have to buy gas, but I also like the roads that let me get to work or wherever I'm going. So that's important. And so and then we think about the driver that does not have an electric vehicle. And so when we talk about MBUF with them, it's really to emphasize this fairness thing and to say, yeah, so this is a good system for you. This is going to feel good to you because right now you're sort of carrying the cost of your neighbor who has a electric vehicle or a higher efficient vehicle. When we talk to folks, with in the rural communities or states that have large rural populations, one of the main concerns that people have and bring to us is seems like it's going to be really unfair for people who live in rural communities who just have to drive farther and often own larger vehicles because of the kind of work that they do, the kind of conditions they have to drive in, and that sort of thing. And so there's a real concern there. If I have to pay for every single mile I drive and I just have to drive more because my closest grocery store is 30 miles away, it would stand to reason that seems like that would be expensive. So, but it turns out, and I'll get to some of this as well later, it turns out that actually this is not true, that because people in rural areas tend to drive lower efficient vehicles, the pickup trucks and other larger vehicles, actually when you move, they're already paying a higher fee. because of their buying more gas. And so actually, when we move from a fuel tax model to a MBUF model, it turns out that rural drivers actually may benefit from switching. And then we have our motor carrier community and those users. We have, as part of our work, we have a motor carrier working group. I will also talk a little bit more in detail about that, but it's been really important in the work that we do to make sure that they stand apart as a separate entity with their own voice, their own concerns, because the fees that they pay to operate on our roadways is much more complex. Their registration, there are more issues there, and they're running a business, and they so adding a more administrative burden is really a major concern to them. So that's kind of what we need to keep in mind when we're talking about that community. So these are some of the sort of findings we gathered over our now many years of doing pilots. So another main issue that we hear from folks and decision makers is that people are concerned about how this would work and what the privacy implications of this must be. So there are a number of ways to collect the data that would fuel an MBUF system. There's everything from very low tech, where you just use an odometer reading. In states that have an annual safety inspection that includes an odometer reading, that could be a very easy low tech way that doesn't involve any kind of new technology or tracking. Then is on the other end of the spectrum are leveraging the in-vehicle telematics systems that our newer vehicles have, where the data is collected in the vehicle and through some kind of subscription service that most new vehicles and the OEMs are offering these days is available. And then in kind of the mid-range, we have devices that are plugged into the vehicles, and this is how we've run most of our pilots. We go into your OBD2 port and collect the data. And we have two types of those, one that actually utilizes GPS, and then the other one that doesn't, it just tracks the miles on your car. The GPS enabled ones and the in-vehicle telematics, the benefits that we get from those, of course, is that we know when you're driving in and out of state. And so when we're thinking about this from the perspective of a multi-state region, and trying to make sure that vehicles are paying into the system of the roadways that they're driving on, and this is particularly important in metro areas such as New York, DC, Philadelphia, where there's a lot of states in and out all the time, or vehicles in and out of different states all the time. That GPS data is really important. Anyway, so this is a big privacy concern. Of course, people don't like to feel that they're being tracked, and they don't necessarily want to feel like the government is sitting in their car tracking all their miles. But what we're finding is that doing these pilots on the ground, it really helps reduce the concerns that they have. And I think people are kind of, as some of these quotes say, wow, I guess my phone that I'm carrying around all the time with me, that's tracking me too. So maybe this isn't so big. But actually getting people with their hands into the systems and doing these pilots has been really beneficial in kind of reducing some of the concerns. Here are the data that show kind of what I was speaking to about this before in terms of the rural impact. So these are 4 states we've done this work in. And what this shows is that, generally, if you live in an urban area, you might see an increase in your annual payments. It's small though. It's, the highest is in Maine, we saw an increase of average increase of $14 per year. So, just over a little over $1 per month more than you'd be paying with buying fuel. And then across the board in our rural communities, really, when you compare what people are paying now with a fuel tax system to what they would pay under an MBUF, there's a decrease. And again, this is because of the vehicles that residents of these communities are tending to drive. So this has been really, really important data to share with decision makers and the general public. Another thing we found is that actually the EV owners, once they understand what the problem is, they support this idea. They can make that link between use and payment. And again, they're not having to buy fuel. That's a huge savings. But there is a need for our roads. So we found that doing this research that this isn't a barrier. There's a concern out there that people say, oh, if we do this MBUF thing, no one will buy electric vehicles. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. And again, this concept of fairness really resonates well with people. And so when you put up pictures again like this one that say, oh, wait, there are two cars. Actually, this slide I'm noticing has different data from a different state, but the same concept here is that you have kind of two cars of the same exact size and type, but one's newer than the other, and the driver of that newer vehicle is really paying half the cost of that fuel tax and driving the same number of miles on those same roads. So really the beauty behind this MBUF system is it really links that use and payment. And I think that resonates well. Another thing that we found is that we have to crack this nut, which is really difficult. This cross-state travel, this out-of-state travel, and our pilots specifically, more than some of them in the other parts of the country, have really shown this, that people are driving all over the place. I mean, these are the states we had in our 2022 pilots, the ones these are where residents lived, and they drove all these places. So we really are going to need to figure that out, and that's challenging without that GPS data. So we have to figure that out. And so the point is to make here is that we find that states are saying it's fine to have GPS and we want people to have that option, but there are always going to be people that will only do this if there's a non-GPS. So there probably is some sort of hybrid model that is needed for how these run. So that's kind of high level findings that we've pulled together from the work we've done across the pilots. And I just wanted to dive in a little bit to give you some more details about the specific pilots we've done and some findings specifically in New Jersey, just because I know that's part of your region. So this phase 4 pilot, which is the one we just conducted in 2022, we had 4 states engaged in this pilot. Was 4 months long, and people drove over 3 million miles, and 14% of that was out of the state. So again, that's pretty critical to sort of figure out how to capture that. And then the device types. I think this is really interesting because we kind of chuckle about this all the time, where when we ask people in their surveys, what they're worried about, and often they say at the beginning that we do a pre-pilot survey and a post-pilot survey, and often at the beginning people say, oh yeah, I'm really worried about privacy, I really don't want to be tracked, and then they're given this menu of options of what kind of device they want, and then they choose, 53% choose the plug-in with GPS. So it's sort of a conceptual concern, but it seems like there's a good number of people say they're concerned, but then they still go for the GPS. And then when you follow up with them at the end of the survey, they say, oh yeah, actually, I'm not so worried as I was before. So in New Jersey, this just kind of gives you a quick snapshot of what we did here. We had 863 people enrolled in this one. In New Jersey specifically, 13% were out of state. We had a range of fuel types. And the map on the right really shows you kind of where they were. So when we were conducting the survey, we had target enrollment numbers based on different types of geographies and populations to try to make sure that we were gathering a representative sample from the state of New Jersey of types of folks who are involved in this pilot. We're really excited in New Jersey in particular because our enrollment target was actually only 400 people, and we blew that out of the park, which was really exciting because it can be difficult to get people to join these pilots. And we really attribute a lot of that success in enrollment to some excellent media coverage that we got, and it got a lot of coverage. The program got a lot of coverage, and it also what we found was that we were really able to engage the media in some nuanced conversations, and so we felt like the news coverage was really helpful. You know, I'm sure all of you are aware sometimes news coverage can be not helpful, but we felt like they really kind of got the nuance of a pretty complicated issue. And so I think that not only did this pilot in New Jersey serve us, we learned a lot from the participants and the data that we gathered, but it was also really effective, just kind of public outreach, public education opportunity. We found, so this is again some of the data that we gathered through this pre and post pilot survey and focus groups. We did both of those things. And so as you can see, a lot of the concerns, everything from privacy to how annoying is it going to be to is it accurate, you know, every single one across the board, really those concerns dropped. They didn't go away. Those concerns are still there, but the pilot really helped to alleviate some of those concerns that people have. Another benefit we saw from doing this pilot was it was just a good awareness, not so much necessarily only about MBUF, but just how this all works, how our transportation systems are funded and supported. And so that's another benefit that that really came out of this work in New Jersey, but as well, you know, it happens every single time we do these pilots. And then again, people after being in the pilot know more about MBUF, which is logical, but is also good to see. And so this one is really that question of, are you in support of this idea? Do you think it's a good idea to replace the fuel tax with MBUF? And so it seems like, I mean, in New Jersey, people sort of say, yes, this makes sense. I get it. I think this is a good idea. There wasn't a huge change in this as a result of the pilot, but I think some of those other data still show that there's still a lot of education that comes along with doing this sort of work. And we asked people about whether or not they think this is more fair, which kind of ties into that previous slide. And generally, yeah, people think it's more fair. The circle on the left is the data that we got from a statewide survey. So the distinction here is that that's the general public. Those are not people that were involved in the pilot, and that's from a statewide survey we did in a previous round of these grants for New Jersey in 2020. And so basically, we heard there that about 47% think it's a good, fair system. And then on the right side, that data is from these pilot participants from 2022. And again, we didn't see a huge jump in change between before and after the pilot, which is an interesting finding. But generally, people seem to think it's fair. And then we talked to the focus group people, particularly because we were able to kind of get more detail out of them in that context. How they felt with the process of actually using these devices and being in the pilot. And it seemed like what we found across the board with these different systems and data collection systems was that generally people were pretty pleased with that. It's not too difficult or burdensome to use these devices or to be in this program. So that's reassuring. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Virginia again, because we did some interesting work there also in our last pilot. So this slide kind of emphasizes, it goes over again what I already mentioned, that Virginia's program, it's brand new. It just started in last July 2022. And again, it's unique in that it's for cars that get over 25 miles per gallon. It's voluntary, but it's in lieu of this highway use fee that they have in place. And it stands to benefit financially benefit folks that drive less than their average number of miles, which are 11,600 miles per year. So I think when we started, we were part of this. They were part of this grant, and we started working with them. They were in it. We use this grant in a different way than we have for other states, because they had a program that they were getting up and running. So we were able to work with them on some of the kind of the messaging and the outreach there, because that's kind of what they were looking for and what they needed. And so we imagined that we were really going to target those kind of more urban dwellers who are likely to drive fewer miles and could really benefit from a program where they were only paying to drive. So we did this message testing campaign with them, and the goals were really to get the word out about this program, and also to figure out which message might get support. And we did this through social media. We were able to target certain folks based on their profiles, all that scary data that people have on us. And we kind of came up with these 4 key messages across these 4 areas. So one really about saving money. So again, if you think you're going to drive less than that average amount per year, you're going to save money if you join this program. Another one targeted to folks that are really into innovation and the new technology, and kind of trying to appeal to them from that perspective. And then another one sort of making the case that if you want to have good roads, then you need to help us pay for the roads, and here's a way to do it. Here's a way to collaborate with us to make sure that our roads are funded appropriately. And then finally, appealing to the group that is really focused on, the environment, and sort of and saying, okay, you have this high efficient vehicle, you're doing good things for the environment. So let's be part of the whole picture here and make sure that our roads can work for these better vehicles that we have. And the interesting thing that we found is that every single one of these messages performed equally across the market that we were testing. So they all had, I don't have the stats in front of me, unfortunately, but it's something like 7 million views and about 11% click-through rate, which we were told by the experts that's very high. That people seeing something on their social media and clicking on it, 11% is really quite high. And we're going to be working with them hopefully in the next round to kind of dig into this more. But we suspect that one of the reasons their enrollment was so much higher than was anticipated was because this was a really effective marketing campaign. And we learned a lot as well, because it was interesting to learn that all of these messages can resonate, and there's a lot of reasons why people would be interested in doing this. So that's kind of a little snapshot of something interesting that we did in Virginia. And again, that was it worked well because they had a real program. It's a little harder to do that in a state where they're just exploring the issue and maybe doing a pilot. But I just want to touch quickly on our motor carrier working group. This is we're the only entity that has been in the country that is really looking at MBUF from the motor carrier perspective specifically, and has actually done some pilots. And one of the things that we have done, which has been really effective, is create this motor carrier working group. And the members of this group are from all these different types of entities. And it's actually, it's secret. we never say who's in the group. And that has been really effective for the group. It's meant that we can have the meetings that we get together, people feel very free to be open and honest. And I think we get much more higher participation because we're able to kind of close that door, so to speak. We still come out with reports and data. We anonymize everything. But for the motor carrier community, which can be wary of working with the government, we have been really effective at kind of bringing them all to the table. So this group meets regularly, and we've really just done a great job of listening to them, and basically making the case that you may hate this idea, but if you're not at the table talking about why you hate it and what's going to work for you and what's not, then everyone else is going to figure out a system that's going to be in place, and then you're going to have to deal with it. So come tell us why you hate it and what you hate about it and how we can make it better. And so one of the main things that we've been looking at with this motor carrier working group is how payment process and rate structure can work. And I think something's been actually interesting that I'm not sure. My sense is that there are many folks in this group that are surprised by this. Is that we've kind of walked through these different rate structures and landed on kind of the best option being based on registered weight. So we started in our first round of pilots saying, okay, what if all the trucks paid the same rate? And that was a flat fee. And that was kind of deemed that didn't work because the fact is that some trucks put a lot more wear and tear on the roads than others. And so that didn't seem right when we started looking at the data and what some of these different trucks in these categories would have to pay. So then we did another round where we looked at multiple rates and we kind of broke them up by their mileage per gallon. And the problem there was that we found on these edge cases, these vehicles that were kind of like right below or right above, were almost the same mile per gallon, but paying drastically different amounts in their kind of fake MBUF fees that we were looking at the data. And so that was also thrown out. So in this most recent pilot, we looked at registered weight as a way to apply the rates. And because registered weight is something that all vehicles have to have, it's not something that you have to track over time. It's not laden weight. And this is something that really our motor carrier working group has kind of coalesced around and said, yes, we think this this can work as long as the categories are consistent among states, and that is a big issue. And as long as this isn't adding an additional administrative burden, and I don't have to report in every single state. If there's kind of one simplified way to do this, this is something we can live with. So that's what we're finding. That's what we're hearing. You know, still a long way to go and a lot of research to do, but that's been really interesting. This is just a snapshot of our most recent truck pilot. We called it International Truck Pilot because we did have some trucks that crossed the border in and out of Canada. It just shows kind of where the trucks were registered. These are all different types of companies that we had, different kind of vehicles, and we collected the data, and we have a report that will be coming out in a few months that provides some insight into this. These are the type that, you know, again, we have all different kind of trucks, different kinds of, you know, everything from a sort of two vehicle owner operator to a really large fleet of trucks that were managed to kind of get that full snapshot. And so this is just sort of the last piece of that I wanted to touch on specifically that we've looked into, which is this work, this rate setting work, which is something we've also just wrapped up in our last pilot, not necessarily based for trucks. This is more looking at passenger, but could be applied. But basically, all these pilots, the ones we've done as well as others, have always kind of conceptualized this as a revenue neutral model, at least to start the conversation. And what we mean by revenue neutral is what would the rate need to be per mile in a certain state to replace what the state is gathering in fuel tax. And that varies a bit by state because of their different fuel tax amounts. But that isn't necessarily the only way to do it, and it's not necessarily the best way to do it. And there are states that want to look for opportunities to increase what they're gathering for their transportation funding. And so we did some work to look at, you know, what are the different options for how you could look at rates. And this is just showing kind of the spectrum of ways that we could use different data or characteristics to set rates. So the easiest one is certainly what type of vehicle you drive, and whether that's the miles per gallon that you get, or the type of engine that it has. Then we have volume of, and that could be everything from, just those registration fees that are being set up. Then we have volume of use, which is really the MBUF. There could be owner characteristics or location of use. And so this is where we get into ideas. We looked at some options, some scenarios that would look at, okay, so if we're concerned about our rural communities, because we want to take some of that burden off, even if they're going to benefit over an MBUF, they still are. The fuel tax and is a regressive tax, and a lot of communities, people in lower income communities, maybe they're paying an outsized portion of their income on transportation. So are there ways to sort of set a different rate if your car is registered in a rural county versus an urban county? That would be an example. And then of course we have traffic conditions, and that could be, or time of day, and that could be something where we get into congestion pricing, cordon pricing, that sort of thing. And then up to sort of vehicle occupants. And so what this is showing is not only categories, but also kind of the spectrum of what's easy to what's quite difficult. So this is just to sort of take that next step of conversation of, okay, so if we know this can work, seems like this could work, not easy. There's issues with administrative fees and how this is implemented, but how could we then use this tool for some of the policy goals that our agencies might have? So just kind of to summarize at the end here, we've done a lot, we've learned a lot. We've been working at this since 2018, so we really know a lot more than we did 5 years ago, but we really have a lot more to do. We have a lot more to figure out, and we're going to continue to work in this space as the landscape is changing, as folks in different states and decision makers are asking us questions. We're doing a lot of testifying instead of in front of transportation committees and legislative bodies. We're launching more pilots. We'll be looking to do more work with us in those next round of grants. And we're excited, and we're always looking for more partners and folks interested. So this is my last slide. It's sort of like, where are we with this? What we think this is probably where we're headed. We're not necessarily advocating for it. We just want to make sure if this is the solution that we are, we're setting up ourselves, our states, our all of our agencies for success here. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions if we have a few minutes to do that.
Thank you, Virginia. That was such a great presentation. Wow, the research and the work that the Eastern Transportation Coalition is doing on this subject is really terrific. I'm going to take, I guess, a little bit of executive privilege and start us out with a question that I've got, which is, I'm kind of curious if you've noticed an impact on the number of miles that people are driving because of the fee. I guess, as a driver myself, you put the gas in the car because you have to. You don't really think about how much the gas tax is, so you don't really connect how much you're driving necessarily with how much you're paying. But when it is much more discrete in that way, I'm wondering if people are trying to minimize the number of miles that they drive because of those fees. Has the coalition noticed anything?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We haven't, so the pilots we've run there's no actual money involved. And so what people get is a statement every month that says, you drove this many miles, and we think we estimate you pay this much in gas tax based on your car and the number of miles you drove and the average gas price in your state. And then if you were under an MBUF, this is what you would have paid, and so it shows the difference. We haven't asked that question. Thank you for asking it, because I do think that probably the prime place to ask that would be in with the Virginia participants. And we are hoping that we will be working with them in this next round of funding to do some survey work on existing participants, because they're now at that point where folks are going to have the opportunity to re-enroll in this program, and then they're going to be expanding hopefully to some. Right now it's just re-registrations, but they're going to hopefully be expanding that to different groups. So anyway, we may have an opportunity to get that sort of data, but that's a great question.
Thank you. I have a few more, but I'm going to hold off on my questions. I want to first offer our guests in the room, who I believe are from New York City DOT, to see if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. And if you do, we have a microphone at the podium for you. It's not your only chance. You can think about it. Oh, Jeff, if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the great presentation. I didn't quite understand the connection between rural drivers paying less. Is that a vehicle substitution effect that driving different kinds of vehicles, or how is it that rural drivers ended up paying less theoretically?
Yeah, so it's not so much that they're paying less than their urban drivers, it's they would pay less than they do now. Because they're already buying more fuel than someone who drives fewer miles, obviously, and who has a more efficient vehicle. So it's that if you switch over to this MBUF system and you apply a per mile fee instead of the fee on the gas, on the gallons of gas, that they actually come out ahead in this revenue neutral model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Any other questions? Allison or Jane, you guys are good? Okay, all right. In that case, we're going to open it up for the folks that are online. I think we've got some questions in the queue. Stephanie, I think you're going to read those for us, please.
Yes, we have 5 chat questions. I'll read them in the order they were received. The first one, a question about how the VMT fee is collected. If you could just briefly speak about that.
Yeah, so so there's a number of ways of doing it. In our pilots, we have, well, the VMT fees are, I guess that question is not so much about how the data is collected, is actually about how the fees are collected. So for the most part, I think in the pilots that are out there, it's a monthly payment that is, I should be careful though, I'm not 100% sure about Utah and Oregon. So, but there has been a conversation about the burden it could cause someone if they have to pay that all at once, because often the concept here is put forward is, well, someone could pay when they pay their registration, their annual registration, but that could be an additional cost. Whereas, you know, when you buy gas, you pay that fuel tax over time. But anyway, there needs to be some kind of mechanism, and so I think for the most part, there are opportunities that you can pay it on a monthly basis through these programs, or there could be opportunities to pay sort of when you pay your annual registration fee. But that's another question, that's something that needs to be sorted out, and every state is kind of looking at, the ones that are looking at this are looking at it in different ways of how this would be administered. Is it through their DMV? Is there another mechanism? Is there kind of a third party entity that would be collecting it? There's a lot of questions still out there. And again, because most states, there's only 3 programs that actually are collecting fees, there's still a lot to be figured out about the best way to actually collect that. There's been suggestions of maybe it's something that you would submit every year with when you pay your taxes, your state taxes. So that's, yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how do the pilot systems handle travel in areas that are dark to cell phones?
Yeah, so the OBD port devices, they track the number of miles regardless of where you go. And so the ones that have GPS, if the system is not working, it's still just tracking your miles. So there may be some gaps or some inaccuracies in the actual location of data, but the real core data that we're looking for here is just the number of miles driven. And so that actually doesn't take that into account. To be honest, I'm not sure the in-vehicle telematics models, I would guess it would be a similar thing. I'm not a technology whiz, so I'm not sure, but I do know that we can certainly gather the data on the miles driven, and it may be that some of the data about location could be compromised by that. But that sort of core data just about numbers of miles in general areas is we can get accurately.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, thanks for an informative presentation. Could you talk about how mileage rates are being set? Would they vary by state? how would out-of-state users be?
Sorry, how would out-of-state users
Be charged, I suppose, with
Yeah.
the mileage rates, would they vary by state,
Yeah,
how they're being set?
yeah. So, as I got to the end of that presentation and I talked a little bit about those rates, maybe this question came in before, but definitely at the moment, the states really have looked at this revenue neutral, I think, idea. So really the sort of calculation that's based on, okay, if we're going to collect the same amount, what would that be on a per mile rate? And it is different in different states, depending on their current fuel tax rates and revenue. But this is an opportunity to sort of leverage those policy concerns and think a little bit more about how those rates could be set in what types of categories. The out-of-state one is a huge issue, and I think what will be needed is some kind of a clearinghouse model where the states are collaborating on, and this is we've been working closely with and trying to think clearly about sort of the tolling industry as in some ways beneficial, and some good lessons learned there in terms of this reciprocity idea and interoperability. But basically, we would need a way to have a major clearinghouse that pulls all the data together and says, sort of apportions it based on the number of miles driven in each state. I think that's the ideal. To get from here to there, it's going to be a long haul because states are exploring this sort of on their own terms in their own ways, and so we're going to have a sort of a long transitional period to a point where that really can be a consistent and seamless system. But I think most people would agree that we need to be thinking about that now so that we don't get to a point where we really have these different systems and everyone will lose out because we won't be able to attribute. States like Florida, I mean, that's a huge concern because so many of their vehicles that drive many miles on their roads are not registered in their state because they have so many folks that spend the winters down there, and so you don't want to end up with a system where people are paying all their sort of communication infrastructure to one state and driving most of their miles or many of their miles somewhere else.
Great, thank you so much. And I do think this was answered later, but good for you to thank you for clarifying a little more. The next question is, do the pilots index the fees to inflation?
So some of the states are indexing as they think about some of these fees, especially the kilowatt hour fees. That's one that has come up so far that I'm aware of. Again, the pilot studies that we've done, they're 4 months, and they what we really have done with that is determined based on the fuel tax price at the beginning of the pilot. We've used that data to keep that consistent. So we haven't changed the sort of fee. Again, this is all just an academic exercise really, because no one's actually spending any money. It's a good question about Virginia. I can't remember exactly what their, some states do have their fuel tax indexed to inflation and some don't. And so I would imagine that as those states explore pilots and or programs, they would, that would be involved, whether or not they have that or that would be accounted for. But again, our pilots, we set a fee based on the sort of where we are on go time with when the pilot starts, and they've been 4 months long, and so it wouldn't be necessarily a huge impact. Perhaps this last year more, but that's how we've done it so far, just to keep it simple for now. But that's something that would have to be considered in a real pilot for sure.
Thank you. Just a quick question: if the presentation can be made available to meeting participants, I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can do it.
Thank you so much. We'll make a PDF of that. And then there was another question that was posted in the Q&A feature. There were 2 questions, so if you need me to break them down again, just let me know. First question is, for people who need to drive their personal vehicles for work, was there any concern on how the MBUF impacts mileage reimbursement? That's the first question. I'm happy to repeat it. And the second question is, was there any concern from pilot program users about the GPS monitoring systems tracking their speed and potential ramifications for that, either now or in the future?
Yeah, so on the first question about people driving their vehicles for work, again, that's interesting. It's not something that has been brought to our attention necessarily as a concern. I guess my answer is that it's the same. It would be the same as it is now with a fuel tax. So again, if this is in place of a fuel tax, people would perhaps the reimbursement rate that you may be given for driving your personal vehicle, if that is something that your employment offers you, it would sort of be built into that same rate and treated that same way. That's just my guess. And then, sorry, what was the second question about?
And was there any concern from pilot program users about the GPS monitoring systems tracking speed, potential ramifications for that now or in the future?
So speed and there also we have in some of our pilots we've offered kind of these enhanced features, and one of them is braking and sort of driving performance. You can get a score on your driving performance, and that is the same kind of data that insurance companies are using these days, some of them, to kind of increase your, provide an incentive for you to be a safe driver, to have a decrease in your insurance rates. And so those are features that can be turned on and turned off. And we were surprised that people didn't seem as excited about these features as we expected they'd be. We thought, oh, maybe this is an extra benefit to kind of participating as in using one of these devices. So we didn't hear concern. We just heard that they weren't necessarily useful to people. They certainly weren't going to go out and join an MBUF program because they were going to understand their driving behaviors better, it seemed. And I think that privacy concern goes to, can people be tracking? There is an overall concern here. Is the government going to just be sitting in my car with me driving around, and what can they do with that data? So we have very strict privacy protocols in place about the data and what it's used for. And we are, again, finding that when people participate in these pilots, those concerns do drop. But those are all issues that people have brought up to us, yeah.
Just got a chat question that just came in. Do you take into the consideration of different financial levels of the American family? A lot of families cannot afford to purchase new high-efficiency vehicles or EVs. Are they going to pay more compared to people who can afford high-efficiency vehicles?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have just done, so equity is a big issue, and it's something we've been talking about. And I didn't actually put this on any of the slides because it's complicated, but we're just sort of sorting out how to talk about it. But we did a socioeconomic analysis in our most recent study in a few states, looking at different income groups, different demographic groups, and how an MBUF would impact them. And basically the takeaway, and we were really hoping, I think we all went in with this hope that, the fuel tax is regressive. It's very regressive. It's not a good model. Is MBUF better? And I think our takeaway was that actually we were making some assumptions going in that some of these incomes, these income groups might benefit the same way we kind of saw with the rural groups, that the rural groups really do benefit at the moment, given the kind of vehicles that they drive, with a shift to an MBUF. But what we found is when we look at these different types of demographics, whether it's income or race, that there's a lot of variation within those groups of the types of vehicles that are driven. And so what it really comes down to, and this makes sense, of course, is that you are going to benefit from this MBUF program if you drive a car that uses a lot of gas, because you're not going to be paying as much for the gas that you buy. You're just going to be paying for the miles that you drive. So, and it turns out that there really is a lot of variation. The data is just very messy. There's no clear consensus that we can draw, except for to say, MBUF is not going to make this worse on people. It's also not going to solve the problem. This is not the solution to solve equity concerns in our communities. But it isn't going to make it worse. It might make it a teeny tiny bit better. It's very small. But I think the bigger question here is, yeah, how do we support folks who could really benefit from paying less in of their income in transportation towards these vehicles that that are more fuel efficient, or don't require purchasing gas and have lower maintenance costs, all the good things that we love about EVs. How do we make sure that we can get people of lower income access to those? But I don't think it's through MBUF. I think that we need to look at some other programs and opportunities for ways to support those communities and have access to those vehicles, which, as we all know, can be more expensive and newer, which makes them more expensive. So it's something we are looking at. I think what, at the end of the day, when we did all this analysis, really our takeaway is it's not gonna make an equity problem worse. It's also not gonna solve an equity problem. We do have equity problems, and we should look for other opportunities to help with that.
So much. That's sort of with that equity question. I personally was starting to think about Lyft drivers and Uber drivers who do a lot of vehicle miles traveled and what that would do for them. Okay, I think that is all the chat questions we have. Yeah, that's it. Nothing new since we've been talking. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. Jeff may have another question in person, and this will be probably our last question, just because we want to get to our other guests.
Gina, I think we've all heard the saying that states are laboratories of democracy, and this seems to me a great illustration of that concept. But thinking about that actually spurs a couple questions in my mind. First, have there been federal efforts to think about the MBUF? Has Congress taken up the issue or talked about the issue? And then second, is there a difference between conversations in red states and blue states? I know Utah, of course, is a red state, but it's slightly different political culture than many other red states. And I know on the other side, Connecticut, a very blue state, but very flush with funds from a small sales tax that has swelled the coffers of their highway trust fund or their roads and highways trust fund there. And so there may be less impetus to think about novel solutions to dealing with declining gas tax revenues. So be interested just to hear your thoughts on both federal and differences between red-blue state conversations.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, on the federal conversation, through the IIJA, there is funding to do a national pilot on MBUF. And so there's an advisory committee that we've been waiting to get set up. It still hasn't been established, but hopefully in the next few months we'll see that get formed. And then there is again, funding that's been set aside to support a national pilot. I've been involved in some of the conversations about what that should look like. And it is interesting to think of a national pilot because of course we pay federal gas tax as well. And so the idea here is we would need a federal system to replace that. When you think about it from the federal perspective, we don't necessarily have a cross-border multi-state issue to contend with. But you do have a question of how do we have access to the data? How do we, get the technology out there in vehicles? So I think it's, I think the federal government, there is going to need to be something happening at that level. But I think the states really are going to be leading the way and driving the conversation. And it's really important that this is happening at the state level to inform that bigger conversation. So, so that's kind of what's happening on there. But definitely keep your eye on that national pilot, because hopefully there'll be some more news coming out about that soon, and possibly some ways to get involved. And then on the question about states and politics, yeah. Right, you hit the nail on the head. It's really interesting. I mean, that's something that's really fascinating about the work that we get to do, which is not just one state, but work with a number of states. we definitely find that they all, like to talk about how unique they are. And they are for different reasons, but and the politics can change on a dime. We were working in one state, I won't say which one, but we were about to go out with we were going to set up a pilot for them, and then we got word, and within an hour we had to shut the whole thing down because there was an upcoming governor's race, and there was concern that it could all just derail things, and we just had to go quiet and kill the whole thing. So that happens with this topic. It's definitely political, and I would say the biggest. So in terms right now, it seems like the sort of emergence of electric vehicles tends to drive that. Whether it's there's sort of two sides. One is, look, electric vehicles are the problem. Let's just make them pay a big fee. And then you hear the advocates say, well, wait a minute, if we slap this huge fee on electric vehicles, no one's going to buy an electric vehicle anymore. And I think we need to be somewhere in the middle. I think in general, people buying electric vehicles, they're going to understand many of them are higher income. They can afford a couple $100 fee to help our roads. And most people kind of understand that when they get it, when it gets explained to them. But I also think, we need to capture that. But I do think that what we find is this kind of linking use and payment, making it fair. That does seem to resonate across the lines in blue states and red states. And so we're sticking with that kind of message. We're just trying to make this fair, and people tend to like a user fee, and so that seems to work. That message is working well.
Great. All right. Thank you, Virginia. That was a terrific presentation, a really great Q&A, and I think we've explored this topic on a really great level. So thank you again for all the questions and for your presentation. So now we're going to move on to the next portion of our agenda, which is going to be on mobility developments. We've got a couple of guests to talk about some of the work going on in New York and Connecticut. So we're going to start off with Jim Davis, who is the Director of Statewide Policy and Performance with New York State DOT. And Jim's going to be updating us on New York's statewide mobility services program. Jim?
Great. Hi, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity here to provide an update on our, and maybe an intro. Hopefully you can see my slides here. Okay. Maybe an intro to some folks participating here in one of NYSDOT's, New York State DOT's efforts to support mobility, particularly focusing on promoting effective alternatives to single occupant vehicle travel. From the name of this forum, pretty much everyone participating in this meeting is likely engaged in working on some aspect of trying to meet mobility needs in the kind of changing marketplace out there. This specific NYSDOT contract that I'm going to speak to is the statewide mobility services is aimed at leveraging and complementing and collaboratively supporting the efforts of this broader group of agencies and providers and organizations that are pursuing kind of the common goals of improved mobility options around the state. Kind of probably stating the obvious here, but there's no single agency that can address the mobility needs all by itself. And this contract is really intended to support NYSDOT's efforts to assist and support the kind of ongoing mobility efforts of all the folks who are kind of working on that common set of issues. So the statewide approach that we're looking to apply here is building on a long history of travel demand management programs that the department has managed and operated in the New York metro region, dating back to the Clean Air Act in the early 90s. Our regional offices in Long Island and Hudson Valley and New York City have managed travel demand management programs for years, doing outreach to employers and such, which we'll talk a little bit about. So we're really looking to build on the partnerships that we've learned about working with employers and other agencies and modal agencies over the course of those contracts as we pull together into one statewide approach on trying to facilitate mobility. So in addition to the building on those TDM programs, we've also made efforts in the more recent times to integrate travel demand management and transit into our own NISDOT transportation system management and operations practices and strategies. So I'll touch on that a bit. We're broadening the focus beyond the New York City region to mobility needs and potential partners working these goals across the state. Looking to understand and apply a complete trip perspective to support alternatives to single occupant vehicle travel, trying to understand where our own network and the connecting first mile, last mile issues are a constraint or an opportunity to improve the overall performance of these alternative modes to single occupant vehicle travel. We're looking to leverage technology and the kind of revolutionary changes in data and emergence of public and private mobility service innovations, and looking for how we can contribute to enhancing kind of integration and the effectiveness of mobility strategies built around these. Kind of setting some historical context here. I talked a bit about this just now. So we've been operating travel demand management, employer outreach programs, marketing and technical support, promoting transit and carpooling and other sustainable modes. Our 501 New York Rideshare program has been kind of the front-facing version of this over time with the carpool matching, van pool formation support, other TDM services I'll touch on in a minute here. We've also, over the course of the 511 program, also now about 15 or 20 years in operation now, working with the transit industry on helping them with their schedule and service information data, and within the 511 open source trip planner, we have a statewide representation of 63 operators across the state that we think we can leverage in other contexts for promoting alternatives to single occupant vehicle. Outside of the New York metro area, we have historically been working with other regional TDM programs and making the tools and services that we have developed in the New York metro area available to them and their programs. So we kind of look to build on that as a way of approaching the statewide efforts. So we're initially starting out. We're going to be continuing our existing TDM programs and looking for how they can evolve over time to support this broader array of mobility. So within the existing program, we do employer workplace planning, customized ride matching, and transit info portals for some of the larger employers. We manage a guaranteed ride program for program participants. We support van pool formation, and we have manage and promote network of park and rides that for carpooling and commuter transit, and we develop and marketing materials and support outreach on campaigns like Car Free Day and Earth Day and employer campaigns. So what we're looking to do statewide here is really look for how we can achieve some economies and efficiencies by connecting together the folks who are working on this topic. The big item out there that's driving a lot of this is with the Climate Leadership and Protection Act, the targets of 40% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030 and 85% by 2050. This is really, how we can get the most out of our mobility strategies. It's really kind kind of an all hands on deck issue that we're looking to understand and support. And we're looking at this as, as I said before, this is not one agency. We're looking to engage partners and try and understand and leverage the changes in the marketplace, public and private. What can we do as a state to, from a policy standpoint, from a technical assistance standpoint, support taking advantage of the opportunities that are emerging. Can we work with data analytics and collaborating with partners where we can kind of collectively gain, market insights into common opportunities or operational goals and challenges? How can we set those so that we're most effectively able to meet those? And then at a statewide kind of focus level, are there models of operation that we can and integration where we can bring together multiple providers and support multi-agency partnerships to improve kind of customer service and availability of these services in response to people's travel decisions. Kind of touched on some of this. We're looking at with this expansion of the existing traditional program to the statewide focus, a much broader array of partners across the state, a lot of different rural, urban, human service, public and private, long distance travel, short distance travel. So there's a whole array of challenges and opportunities that are kind of context specific, and if we can come up with some economies of scale on methods and approaches, and looking to identify with regional partners as the contract gets up and running here, what are the service gaps and what are the opportunities and how can we collaborate, identify common strategies, practices, tools, technical assistance to leverage the work that's going on regionally and locally in this area already. In addition to the traditional TDM, employer outreach, we are incorporating a bit more of a focus in this new contract on how can we better connect with the efforts that are going on in the transit world. We do have this technical support program for helping transit agencies pull together their service data in the GTFS standard format and make that available to Google and other third-party trip planners that are out there, so that we're trying to get universal coverage of people will be able to get access to all of the transit systems in New York and how we can support that. So sort of building on that, how can we maybe leverage some of those data aggregation possibilities for common planning and market analysis tools and collaboration. I know in NMTIC, there's been a lot of discussion around, what's the best approach, or is there an approach that we can take on a coordinated basis towards mobility as a service? Obviously, the transit agencies are out there tackling this now, so we would just basically look to see what should what role or can the state make and contribute to making this as seamless as possible and efficient as possible. And then kind of coordination on planning best practices around first mile, last mile. We have the department, state's got its complete streets, the complete streets law that we're looking to figure out how we can more effectively build that into our strategies as a department, and looking in the context of mobility at where is that most effectively leveraged to support these other mobility services that are out there. So looking at it kind of holistically, how can we get a better sense of that from a planning perspective, working in cooperation with partners. And then in the context of TSMO, in the previous contract, we put a lot of emphasis on this, and we want to continue that moving forward. Is how can NISDOT partner with other operating agencies to incorporate modal options and efficient travel is into our multi-agency collaboration into the activities and practices that we engage in as an operating agency. So we did in the previous contract a statewide TSMO strategic plan that was focused on kind of NIDAT's internal operating practices and how we could get more efficiencies and economies of scale across our 11 regions of the state, and how we can hopefully bring that more efficient approach to working with our regional partners and getting more out of the TSMO strategies that we have. We are in this new contract. We'll be supporting an update of an ITS architecture for statewide as part of the requirements at the federal level for deploying ITS technology. So we'll be doing that collaboratively under this new contract, and really looking for enterprise data approaches to TSMO that are more efficient and allow us to effectively exchange data through Transcom and other multi agency forums and operating efforts to basically improve the efficiency of our operating of the system. And looking at the future of travel info with the private marketplace out there and 511, what is the appropriate role for public-facing travel information system? So trying to understand that, and then we have done some work previously in supporting kind of the planning around integrated corridor management and operational pilots. So we would look to continue to support those kinds of activities under this new contract. So that's generally the frame. It's ambitious. It's just getting started. So we would be looking to engage our partners, operational partners, in the very near future on how do we work with you to achieve these objectives that I laid out here. The contract basically provides us with some consulting technical support and assistance to try and meet these objectives. So that's just now beginning, and so we look forward to working with a lot of you as we move forward on this particular contract. So that's my update. So I'll stop at that point.
Great. Thank you, Jim. A lot of exciting work going on at New York State DOT. I'm curious if we have any questions for Jim. Stephanie, did you see anything in the chat box?
There is nothing in the chat, no.
All right, then I'll just make an observation that I think the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act definitely has the possibility and maybe more the likelihood of changing how a lot of New York State agencies are looking to try and bring down greenhouse gas emissions, and that includes New York State DOT. So it was really great to see some of that information covered in your presentation, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move to Anthony Colangelo. We're very glad to have Anthony with us. He's from the Bureau of Policy and Planning at Connecticut DOT. Anthony will share with us the latest on Connecticut's Advanced Traffic Management Systems Strategic Plan. Anthony?
Morning, everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Let's get into it. I'm Anthony Colangelo. I'm Transportation Supervising Engineer in Connecticut DOT. I'm here to present on the statewide Advanced Traffic Management System Plan, Strategic Plan. Before we get into the plan, I just wanted to show a quick org chart. Many of you guys have worked with Hal Decker in the past. Hal is our manager over here in highway operations. Under Hal, we have Aidan Neely, who's in charge of both of the Newington Operations Center and Bridgeport Operations Center. And we have Rich Launder, who's in charge of the Communication Systems Engineering. Kevin Don is in charge of our computerized traffic signal systems, and I am in charge of our advanced traffic management systems. So this map shows our current deployment of ATMS infrastructure throughout the state. The pink dots are our CCTV cameras. The yellow dots are our variable message signs, and the green triangles are our weather stations. As I mentioned before, we have 2 operation centers, one in Newington that covers everything above the 95 corridor, and one in Bridgeport that covers the 95 corridor. This is a map that shows where we want to be. We have identified key corridors throughout the state that we believe would benefit for having our ATMS infrastructure on. These key corridors are shown by the purple outlines. We also identified our priority projects that we would like to complete within the next 15 years. These projects are identified by the blue outlines. So in order for them to be considered a priority project, they needed to meet a specific criteria. So let's get into the criteria. First is the non-recurring congestion. We get our data from the Yukon Crash Repository. So as an example, this is a map of the 95 corridor. Anyone who has traveled in Connecticut on I-95 knows this area very well. Looks like we have a lot of crashes over here in Norwalk and a lot of crashes in Stamford. So we know when we're designing, we have to key in on these specific areas. Next, we look at the recurring delay that we have on 95 in the same area. So again, anyone who has traveled on this area knows that if they're going southbound on 95 AM peak, there's going to be an extreme delay. And then if you go northbound during PM peak, you're going to get an extreme delay. So we know that we have to have camera coverage in this whole area to monitor these situations. Next, we look at our gaps in coverage. These gaps have been identified to us by our operations staff, our state police, and field personnel. And finally, we look at the age of our existing infrastructure. As you can see, the majority of our camera coverage is in a state of poor repair. We define a state of poor repair as being older than 16 years. So for those who know, our infrastructure is like a computer. Typically after 16 years of age, our equipment starts to run out of spare parts and it gets harder and harder to maintain them. So another thing is just because our equipment is in a state of poor repair does not mean it is not operational. So I just checked prior to this meeting. Right now we have 8 cameras with trouble tickets associated with them out of our 363 cameras. So we are 98% operational. So from that criteria, we produced a project action plan. The order of the projects were determined by considering the operational needs. So as you can see, we are prioritizing our replacement projects up front, and then we are looking to expand. So before I get into the specifics of the project, I just wanted to show you the overall layout of the project schedule. This slide is not intended to show you key dates. It's only intended to show you the flow of the projects. So we have 2 project engineering teams that we have in the ATMS unit, and that is depicted by the blue and the green. And we schedule the projects so that each team is not trying to meet key dates at the same time. So when one team finishes the final design on a project, they go right into preliminary design on the next project. So let's get into the project specifics. Project 1 is the addition of ATMS equipment in central Connecticut on Route 9 from I-84 to the Middletown, Randolph Road in Middletown, and also on Route 72 from Route 9 to Route 177. We are planning on installing 29 cameras and upgrading 9 cameras. Next is the Southwest upgrade project, and we are planning on upgrading 31 cameras from on I-95 from the New York border to south of exit 19. And we're also planning on installing 5 cameras on Route 7 from I-95 to Grist Mill Road. Next is a big project for us. It is installing ATMS infrastructure on I-91 from exit 8 to exit 16. We are planning on installing 12 cameras and upgrading 9 cameras. Currently, our 2 operation centers are connected via AT&T fiber. So doing this project, once this project is completed, we will have our 2 operation centers being connected on Conduit owned fiber and using the AT&T fiber as redundancy. Next is the first of the Hartford area replacement projects. So the Hartford area cameras were installed in 2003. They are in desperate need of an upgrade. The Hartford area cameras were originally done in one project, but because this is such a large project, we figured we'd break it out into, we call it 4 different spokes. The first leg would be I-84 east of Hartford, and we are planning on installing or replacing 26 cameras, and then we're going to expand on I-84 to exit 69 with an additional 13 cameras. We're also planning on expanding on I-384 to exit 3 with 3 cameras. Next is I-91 north of Hartford. We are planning on upgrading 18 cameras on I-91. And then we are looking to expand our coverage on I-291 with 4 cameras. And next is the replacement of 40 cameras on I-84 west of Hartford. And finally, I-91 south of Hartford, we're planning on upgrading 29 cameras. Next, we're looking at I-95. We want to upgrade this whole area and go to the Rhode Island border. But before that, we have to upgrade this specific section. And to do that, we need to replace 50 cameras. Then we're looking to expand on I-95 from exit 64 to exit 67 and go a little bit up Route 9 to exit 3. And to do this, we are going to replace 5 cameras on I-95, install 7 cameras on I-95, and install 2 cameras on Route 9. We're going to keep going on I-95 to exit 82 with the upgrade of 9 cameras, and we're also going to install 11 cameras as part of this expansion. And then we're going to shift focus to up north, where we're going to go to the Massachusetts border on I-91. And to do this, we are going to install 13 cameras. And then next, we're going to finish our build out of I-95 from exit 84 to the Rhode Island border with the upgrade of 3 cameras and the installation of 14 additional cameras. So after I-95, we're going to attack the Route 8 area in Western Connecticut by expanding from exit 5 to exit 14. We are going to install an additional 16 cameras. Then we're going to go from exit 14 to exit 36 and do a little upgrade of 84 from exit 17 to exit 23. In this project, we will install 19 cameras and replace 19 cameras. Then we are looking to go west on I-84 from the New York state line to exit 17. For this project, we are going to install 21 cameras and replace 8 cameras. And finally, the last project of our plan is I-395 from I-95 to Route 2 and a little portion of Route 2A where the casino is. For this project, we will replace 6 cameras, install 5 cameras on I-395, and install 5 cameras on Route 2A. So if we do all these projects as scheduled, this is our projected state of good repairs. As you can see, we're planning on doing the majority of our replacement projects up front, and then we are looking to expand. Are there any questions?
I'll jump in on one. Thank you, Anthony. It's more of an observation, actually. I came up through the New York State DOT, a couple of the transportation management centers here. And as Jim mentioned, it's 11 different regions with, I guess, different levels of, automation in each of the regions. So it's really interesting to see Connecticut taking a holistic approach to the entire state and mapping this out over a series of projects over 15 years, which is really great. So more of an observation than a question, but really great. Thanks. I don't know, were there any questions, Stephanie, or anyone in the room?
Actually, there is a question in the chat that just came through. The question is, each of the proposed projects follows a systems engineering approach? The confirmation.
Correct. Yep, we follow systems engineering on all of our projects. In fact, this is a user-based needed. We looked at the user needs when we were doing our priority projects here. So we were constantly asking the operators, field personnel, state police, to get all their input when we were building out this plan.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Anthony. That was really terrific. So I think we are finished with our presentations, and it looks like our time is pretty good. We had planned to hit the trifecta today and have New Jersey represented with Sal Cowan from New Jersey DOT, but unfortunately Sal was unavailable, so we'll look to schedule him at a future meeting. And I think that brings us to our last topic, which is the future meetings. So we are planning to have another one of these really exciting and enjoyable meetings in the fall, and we would be very interested if there are topics that folks are eager to hear about. We can certainly reach out to folks and schedule some presentations. You can let us know afterwards anytime, and we'll also be going through some of the notes that we took during today's meeting to see what ideas might be generated that we can explore further in the fall. So I don't know that there are any other items except to thank our guests again, or our presenters again, I should say. Virginia, Jim, and Anthony, thank you very much for really interesting and exciting presentations. Thank you to our guests in the room from New York City DOT and to our guests online. And unless anyone stops me, I think we're going to close the meeting out. So thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again in the fall. And until then, enjoy the rest of your